I can't believe I'm saying this for the 7th time in a row, but guys, Miyabi is going to change everything. No, this isn't bait. No, this isn't a joke. Miyabi is the most ridiculous DPS that ZenlessZoneZero has ever released, and it's not even close. Her kit, though somewhat complicated but rewarding at times, is full of extremely high multipliers that we've never seen the likes of. I know it sounds like I'm focusing a bit too much on the topic of damage with Miyabi, but when I break things down further, you'll understand why. Side note, in order to even capture footage of Miyabi today, I had to intentionally avoid fighting ice weak enemies and also take weaker disk drives just so that I didn't one-shot every enemy in sight. With that though, I'd like to remind you that all the footage from today's video will be from the creator beta server, so things are subject to change. But guys, without further ado, let's break down the new best agent in ZenlessZoneZero. Miyabi is one of the more complex agents that Zenless has released. She has given new elements, new debuffs, new mechanics to play around, but ultimately her gameplay revolves around Fallen Frost and how it buffs the rest of her kit. Plain and simple, she is a damage dealer with a unique minigame in Fallen Frost to buff her skills to new heights. Between this minigame, her 4000% multiplier on a basic attack, and seemingly unlimited damage potential, she plays unlike any other character but does have a continued reliance on energy and applying disorders. Normally this is the part where I would go over her kit, but actually we need to talk about technically three things. First, a new element that's been introduced alongside her known as Frost. Second, Fallen Frost, which is Miyabi's new mechanic / resource. And third, Shimotsuki, which is one of the highest damage dealing skills that Miyabi has. Let's start with the Frost element. If you saw teasers for Miyabi before this video, you might have spotted this new looking element that kind of looks like the Ice attribute, and you wouldn't be wrong. The new attribute Frost is actually pretty similar to Ice, not just in appearance, but also in properties. However, unlike Ice, which is the original element associated with frozen / freezing / shattered enemies, Frost has a slightly higher disorder damage multiplier, has its own separate multiplier, has its own separate anomaly meter, and can trigger disorder with other attributes including Ice, which is actually pretty funny. Aside from this though, Frost is treated the exact same as Ice. Next, let's talk about Fallen Frost, Miyabi's unique mechanic. This is the resource needed for Miyabi's enhanced basic attack / charged slash, aka Shimotsuki, and you can find it at the top left of your screen. Now the important thing to know here is that reaching 6 points of Fallen Frost will allow Miyabi to cast the strongest version of Shimotsuki, but it consumes Fallen Frost points in the process. That of course then means that we have to go over how you get these points. When triggering her core passive effect Frostburn, Miyabi gains 1 point of Fallen Frost with a 10-second cooldown. When she uses her EX special, she gains 2 points. Upon using her ultimate, she gains 3 points, and assuming she has her additional ability active, she gains 2 points anytime a squad member triggers a disorder. All of this is critical for making Shimotsuki and the Shimotsuki stance stronger, so let's touch on that now. Miyabi's basic attack consists of 2 parts, Kazahana and Shimotsuki. Kazahana is the generic 5-part basic combo, with the first 2 hits applying physical and the last 3 applying frost damage. The damage on Kazahana moves are relatively low and worth avoiding if possible, but notably here as well, the 5th basic attack can block enemy strikes. The second part of Miyabi's basic attack is Shimotsuki, and when Miyabi has at least 2 or more points of Fallen Frost, she can enter into a special stance that lets her charge an attack and grants her invulnerability while doing so. And as I mentioned earlier, each level of this enhanced attack combo costs 2 Fallen Frost points to activate, and the maximum is level 3, which deals the most damage. This totals for a cost of 6 points. Now to be clear, this is a decently long skill animation, and therefore it is highly recommended that you swap off of Miyabi while she is locked into casting the skill, but we'll go over things like that in the combo section. Now let's talk about her core passive. This is another description that might rival a 3-hour feature-length movie, so let's summarize it. When Miyabi deals frost damage to an enemy, she applies this blue flame known as Ice Fire. This lasts 30 seconds, and while building Frost Anomaly against Ice Flame targets, Miyabi's buildup rate is increased by up to 80% depending on her crit rate. This means having 80% crit rate through any means will increase the speed at which she applies Frost, and this will be extremely helpful for later. As a side note, this crit rate does get affected by things like disk drive sets, Nicole's 6th Mindscape, etc, so actually getting the 80% crit rate to maximize the effect is not nearly as difficult or insane as it sounds. The next thing we need to address is Frostburn and Frostbite. When Miyabi fills an enemy's anomaly meter and activates the anomaly effect known as Frostbite, she consumes the Ice Fire, which then triggers Frostburn Break. This deals 1500% of Miyabi's attack, removes the Ice Fire that's on the enemy, and also causes the enemy to enter the Frostburn state. When allies attack enemies in this state, they gain 20% increased anomaly buildup rate against said targets, but Miyabi cannot reapply Ice Fire to these enemies and is instead put on cooldown. What's most important to know here, however, is that Miyabi gains 1 point point of Fallen Frost when she triggers Frostburn Break, and this is crucial for getting to 6 points for her basic attack combo. Now let's talk about her additional ability. Unlike some agents that can bypass the need to satisfy this ability, Miyabi's is a must-have. When another character in Miyabi's squad is a support character or shares the same faction as her, a few buffs are granted to her. First, Shimotsuki's damage increases by 60%. Second, when any squad member triggers Disorder, Miyabi gains 2 points of Fallen Frost. And finally, Shimotsuki during the next stance will ignore 30% of the target's ice res when this is active. This is an incredible amount of damage added to just one skill. On the topic of Shimotsuki, let's now talk about one of the other best ways to generate Fallen Frost to cast it, her EX special. This is a 2-part ability, with the first cast costing 40 energy, but providing her an attack that charges forward, dealing frost damage and providing 2 Fallen Frost points. The second part of the skill is a follow-up attack that deals higher damage and also grants 2 Fallen Frost points as well. Despite this being an energy consuming ability, this is actually not the highest source of damage in her kit, unlike with other agents and their energy use kits. Rather, as I'm sure you've probably guessed at this point, this is just an ability to stack frost points that also happens to deal damage. Miyabi's dodge and assist are standard relative to other attack agents, and they simply protect or act as filler abilities while waiting for Fallen Frost / energy. Therefore, if necessary, performing dodge counters or assists can help deal damage, but outside of this, just spam her dodge whenever you want, since honestly, it looks pretty cool. But there is one thing that I should mention here. With 1.4 coming out, the ultimates in ZenlessZoneZero have also been adjusted, with every character now having their own ultimate gauge. This means that other characters that aren't just the damage dealer can utilize their ultimates too, but it does subsequently mean that any source of generating decibels will also be powerful. Enter defensive assists, which actually provide the highest amount of decibel generation in the game, and this means that performing assists whenever possible is extremely important so that you can cast multiple ultimates. In regard to Miyabi's chain attack, it's a very powerful AoE clearing ability, and definitely something that can clear any multi-enemy wave, but I won't go too far into detail with this specifically, given how wide the range of this ability is. In short, simply use Miyabi's chain attack after a stun, and you'll clear out pretty much any non-elite or boss enemy in sight. Miyabi's ultimate is exactly what you would expect from a DPS. It has a notably higher multiplier than even Shimotsuki and her basic attacks, but what's also worth remembering is that this ability will generate 3 points of Fallen Frost, making it even more valuable to use so that you can generate a stronger charge attack. For skill priority, Miyabi is reliant on the scaling of her abilities despite being an anomaly agent and most of them not caring for them, but in order: Miyabi's core skill, her basic, followed by her ultimate, then her EX special and dodge ending with assist at the end is the order that she will take. In terms of damage share, this makes sense since her basic and ultimate have a huge presence, and therefore after upgrading those two specifically, upgrading any other ability will simply add more damage since, well, of course, she's just a damage dealer. Now let's address Miyabi's combos. Miyabi has tons of small optimizations that can take her to insane levels in ZenlessZoneZero, but today I wanted to provide 2 combos that reach 6 points of Fallen Frost and deal high damage, all while being both helpful and realistic for any kind of player. Before we do that, in case you were curious about what to do against multiple enemies, well, I spoiled it a bit earlier, but as I mentioned earlier, stun an enemy, chain attack, and swap to Miyabi to then completely destroy anyone in sight. But back to the other 2 combos I wanted to share, since those involve fighting bosses or 1 to 2 enemies. The first combo is effective yet simple. It involves using her EX special, then continuing with 2 basic attack combos back to back, and ending the streak with a charged basic attack, aka Shimotsuki, against the enemy. In most cases, this should be enough to fill the enemy's anomaly meter with frost, and will yield you 6 total Fallen Frost points, which then allows Miyabi to blow up the enemy. What is important to know about this combo, however, is that it only works assuming you start off in a fight with 3 points and without having activated Frostburn recently. This means that the combo is perfect for when you enter Shiyu defense for the first time, but it may not work if you use it in the middle of an extended encounter. The second combo requires much more setup and planning, but it does allow you to deal an insane amount of damage, especially if you time it under a stun window. With this, here is the setup. First, you need 6 Fallen Frost points, and second, you need to build the stun meter of an enemy to nearly, but not actually 100. Then, you begin with the Shimotsuki instead, and hit the almost stunned enemy into the dazed state, and you follow this with either an extended or shortened chain attack combo, and return back to Miyabi for her ultimate, EX special, and finally another Shimotsuki. This is a lot to digest and is mostly for sweatier players, but this is unironically one of the highest damage combos that I've ever seen. To be clear, there are also optimizations that you can perform, like swapping off of Miyabi when her Shimotsuki is being cast, since it's so long, but to be honest, this character does so much damage that you can pretty much just stare in awe as Miyabi blows up everything on field. For Miyabi's build, I've got bad news, since this is unfortunately a character that wants a different set of main stats and disc disk drive sets than what is currently meta. To start off, Miyabi performs best currently on the new Branch and Blade set, with a pretty significant boost in her overall stats with its passive. Even if you aren't using this as a 4-piece set effect, as Woodpecker does kind of perform competitively against it, Branch and Blade is still also one of the best 2-piece sets that Miyabi can equip. Alternatives to this are 4-piece Polar with 2-piece Woodpecker, and something like 4-piece Woodpecker with 2-piece Polar, but ultimately all these perform way worse than the previous setup. However, what you need to know about Miyabi's disk drive sets is that she really needs any additional sources of crit rate that she can get, simply so that she can apply Anomaly faster with her passive. To do so, making sure that Miyabi has Woodpecker, which is a set that has crit rate, can be especially helpful for the additional stats. But this is where things get messy, and also why we need to talk about main stats. In terms of 5th and 6th slot options, ice damage and attack percent as the 5th slot, and attack percent or anomaly mastery as the 6th slot will suffice. However, the 4th slot is where things get complicated. If you are running Miyabi's signature W engine with the Woodpecker and Branch and Blade sets, there's actually an argument for attack percent being the best choice here, given the amount of crit damage, crit rate, and damage percent in general that she gains throughout her kit. Stacking any of these stats and not attack percent can actually yield less value than, again, if you were just to run an attack percent 4th slot. Despite this though, there's an even deeper complication. If you aren't using Miyabi's signature W engine, using a crit rate 4th slot disk drive is almost mandatory, since you'd otherwise be missing 24% potential crit rate from the build. Now, to move past all the math and messiness, I do have 2 recommendations here for best sets with main stats, and this is how they look. Branch and Blade 4-piece, 2-piece Woodpecker, signature W engine, 4th slot attack percent, 5th slot ice damage percent, and 6th slot attack or anomaly mastery. Alternatively, Woodpecker 4-piece, 2-piece Polar, non-signature W engine, 4th slot crit rate, 5th slot ice damage, and 6th slot anomaly mastery or attack percent again. Now, of course, you should use what set rolled best for you personally, but with these 2 builds, I also have a sample stat line that you can use if you're trying to guide your build. For either setup, 2.7k attack, 68 crit rate, which gets boosted to 80 with Branch and Blade Song passive, or 80 crit rate outright, then finding 150 anomaly mastery, and finally roughly 110 to 130 crit damage is going to be your goal. Now, we touched on the topic of W engines in the last section, but I've actually got terrible news again. Miyabi's non-signature W engine choices are actually pretty bad. Even without calculations, just the fact that there is only one W engine for anomaly characters that has crit rate pretty much makes Miyabi's the best in slot and a must-have. This answers the question of whether her W engine is worth pulling for, but it does feel quite bad if you lose the 50-50 or 75-25. To give some more context, the damage increase we're currently seeing from Miyabi's W engine on herself is at least 20 to 25%, and if that doesn't sound crazy enough, keep in mind that Ellen's W engine was regarded as the must-pull W engine upon 1.0's release. To be clear, for that W engine, the increase in damage was 20%, and the gap that we're about to discuss right now starts at 20% but can go as high as even 30. Now, if you aren't pulling for Miyabi's W engine, you do still have other options, but as I just mentioned, they're just much worse. Fusion Compiler is the best of the bunch, assuming you can maintain its passive, but it does come with restrictions as per its passive and is ultimately just an S rank. Rainforest Gourmet is the next best choice here, assuming you have no others, but even this W engine ends up performing almost 30% worse than Miyabi's signature. Now, with this, I would of course recommend getting her signature just because of how powerful it is, but otherwise taking Rainforest Gourmet will be your next best choice. Side note, in case you're curious about Weeping Gemini, the fact that Miyabi pairs perfectly with Sun enemies makes this option much worse and kind of makes the passive irrelevant. Finally, we do need to talk again briefly about stats, and I do want you all to keep in mind that your choice of W engine here will dictate how good one disk drive set or your main stat will be, specifically on Miyabi. So with this, remember your W engine specifically when you're deciding what to farm for or which W engine to use. Don't get baited. Now, for Miyabi's Mindscapes, well, they're insane. There's no questioning it. The defense penetration and utility of her first Mindscape is crazy valuable, and let's be clear, being able to reapply Frostburn immediately after Shimotsuki makes this one of the best feeling Mindscapes you can ask for. Her second Mindscape is the craziest that we've seen of any agent thus far, with it increasing her basic and dodge counter damage, but what really sets this apart is that she gains 6 points of Fallen Frost to begin with, she also gains 15% crit rate, and the final move of her Kazuhana basic attack now gives 1 Fallen Frost. This seriously changes the way that Miyabi plays, with her now freeing herself from requiring other agents to help build Fallen Frost, and instead, if you wanted to, you could just keep Miyabi on field 24/7 and blow up everything yourself. Just as a heads up though, if you really like Miyabi, this is for sure the Mindscape that you should at least aim for. Miyabi's 4th Mindscape is also pretty insane if you run her with several anomaly generators or put Freedom Blues on a support on the team, but ultimately the value of this is highly dependent on the fight, fight, how tanky or squishy the enemy is, and how frequently you have Miyabi's ultimate. Finally, if you are a day 1 Miyabi saver and haven't spent on any other agent thus far, yes, the 6 Mindscape is absolutely disgusting. This is an overwhelming increase to her DPS, but if you aren't familiar with what it does, this Mindscape performs each charged level of Shimotsuki as you're charging it. This means that you perform a charged basic 1, charged basic 2, and the level 3 charged basic, assuming that you have 6 Fallen Frost points and are charging it to max. Absolute insanity. Now onto team compositions. There are 3 teams that I suggest and have tested to great lengths, and that would be Miyabi, Yanagi, Caesar, with possibly Nicole as an option, Miyabi, Lighter, Lucy, and finally Miyabi, Bernice, Lucy. All 3 teams cleared content in record speeds, but interestingly, Miyabi, Lighter, Lucy felt the most comfortable to play. Let me not get ahead of myself though. Miyabi, Yanagi, Caesar, or Nicole is easily the best performing trio with constant disorders, anomalies, infinite decibel generation, and all of this means that you get more ultimates. At the end of the day though, Yanagi and Miyabi together with pretty much any character will deal such insane damage that just giving either of these characters a Caesar barrier, defense shred, or an attack increase will essentially result in anything on field being killed. Truthfully, I had to hold myself back from Yanagi stealing the show at times, but the moment that Miyabi had her Fallen Frost points, she instantly dealt almost double the damage that I was seeing from Yanagi. Yes, you heard that right. This is primarily the reason why I had to start fighting without certain disk drives on, or with lesser upgraded W engines in general, but if I had to label this team, I would call this team the definition of overkill. Miyabi, Lighter, Lucy is for those of you who feel the most comfortable with the attack agent compositions that are currently in ZenlessZoneZero, but there's good news. Even if you aren't min-maxing to the extreme, being able to stun and buff the damage of Miyabi with Lighter and Lucy is almost always enough to compete with any other team composition. The damage increases, the attack buffs, the stun duration increases, all of these contribute to a much more comfortable experience when playing this team composition. But there is one flaw or obstacle that needs to be overcome, and that's who should be on field a majority of the time. For Miyabi, she technically only wants to be on field when she can gain Fallen Frost, or when she's about to use her full DPS combo. Lighter suffers when he's not in his morale burst state and deals pretty low days compared to others without it, and Lucy has good value on field when built properly, but she also suffers from having a basic attack without any protection or anti-interrupt. Overall, this isn't the biggest deal since all characters will still perform pretty decently, even if they're not in their ideal states, but it was worth mentioning. The third team then is Miyabi, Bernice, Lucy. This team felt very reminiscent of how Jane Doe teams feel, but with a catch. Unlike in a physical team composition where assaults can boost days generation, this team felt lacking in stun potential by a wide margin. It does, however, mean that you can ultimate, use Shimotsuki, and deal as much damage as you want without needing to set up stunners, but despite this, the team composition felt the most uncomfortable of the 3 that I tested, despite dealing crazy damage themselves too. This was because the enemy wasn't stunned, and there wasn't any real anti-interrupt to prevent my Miyabi from taking damage or getting knocked back. But of course, whenever I use this team against enemies that weren't attacking constantly, or if I just managed to dodge anything anyways, I pretty much one-shot them with no effort put in whatsoever. Now, while all of these teams felt and performed amazingly for one reason or another, I do want to touch briefly on team compositions for Miyabi in general, especially if you don't have the ones I just listed. Of course, there were other pairings like Miyabi, Lycon Sokaku, Miyabi, Yanagi, Rina, and these were ones that could work, but I have to come out and say it. Miyabi's damage is honestly so baffling that even Miyabi herself will likely just clear a majority of the content that no one else could solo. I do personally wish that Miyabi's additional ability was a bit more flexible in terms of who I compare her with, but given how insane her damage is, you might not even care that you're losing something like her additional ability, since she simply kills whatever she wants with whatever pairing you want. I'll keep this final section brief as it should be obvious based on the title, the introduction, and the thousands of people who keep asking about Miyabi under all the ZenlessZoneZero content. But yes, Miyabi is absolutely worth pulling for. She's the highest DPS that the game currently has, and that's even when fighting against enemies that aren't ice weak. If for whatever reason you don't want to play ZenlessZoneZero on hard mode, you can definitely play Miyabi, one-shot everything in sight, and enjoy as everything crashes and burns around you. Personally, I will be doing the same. That's going to be it for this video though, guys. Thanks again for watching. Hope you guys learned something or enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe. As always, I hope to see you guys on the next one. Make sure to check out the rest of my socials, and I'll see you guys next time. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.